Welcome to the energy of 2025. It's all about change. We're going to be talking about change today. And this is going to be a community conversation. So usually around this time of year, I do a presentation about the energy of the year. But this year, it was completely clear to me that that was not the right thing to do. That actually the right thing to do was to engage all of us into a conversation, not so much about the specific energy of this year, the snake year in the Chinese system, which is what I've been very familiar with, but more in this context of change. Because the one thing we can say for sure about this year, and probably for quite a few years to come, is that change is a huge theme for the year. And I feel that it's really important that we talk about it, that we are preparing ourselves. We're looking at how do we respond to change and how do we influence change, because it's probably the most important thing we're going to need to deal with for quite a while. So that's why I've decided to do this event. I did one yesterday with a largely European group, and this one today. And that's why I decided to do it as a community conversation rather than as more of a presentation. Okay, so I'd love to see, I think everybody would probably love to see, who are you, where are you? Why don't you tell us where you are? We've got two people, somebody in snow and ice covered Maryland, that's John, and May in or on maybe a redwood forest hike in Oakland, California. So let's see where you are. Palm Springs, Las Vegas, Louisiana, Oregon coast, Santa Monica, San Diego. Oh, lots of Americans, Mexico, and Melbourne, Australia, Sydney, Australia, Gold Coast, Australia, New Zealand, another New Zealand, Hawaii. Okay, good. We're getting quite a mix. South Africa, Canada, good. Colorado. Excellent. Okay, we've got quite a mix. And in the other group, we had a big mix as well. So the conversations will naturally be different, although we're going to explore the same questions. And I'm going to put these on YouTube. Okay, so this is a public event. If you don't want to be seen on YouTube, you have a few choices. Okay, I'm just going to run through those now so that we're really clear. Because yes, I will be sharing this. So if you don't want to be seen, then please, if you speak during the session, make sure your video is off. I'm happy for you to talk without video if you want to. Then your picture will just show up black, but your name might show there. Okay. If you don't want that even, then the best thing you can do is participate by writing in the chat, and not by actually speaking out. So if you speak, you may be seen by other people. Okay. And I hope that you will feel comfortable to speak and share your views and let yourself be seen, because in a way, part of this is how do we respond to change? And perhaps one part is that we don't always need to hide ourselves away, but that's going to be for you to decide. So we're going to take a very simple format. I have 3 questions. I'm going to tell you the questions now, and we're going to take them in order. My intention is that we go deep with these questions. We're not trying to just be on the surface of them. We want to go really deep, really explore and find something that is new and stimulating for each person who's on the call. And we're going to do it by talking. So if you want to speak at any time, you can raise your hand. There's a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, it might be somewhere in the react icon. You might need to click on react and then find raise hand. If that doesn't work, sometimes it doesn't, then the best way to get my attention is in the chat, although the chat can get a bit busy. So yes, hopefully I will see it. Kate, okay, I think you've got that sorted out. I don't think that's a problem from our end. So the questions are, the first question is going to be, what is change? It's easy to think, oh yeah, well, we know what change is, but I just start to think about this question in the context that everything's changing all the time. So nothing ever actually stays the same. So when we talk about change, if we want to talk about change in a meaningful way, what are we talking about? So what is change is the first question. The second question is, how can we respond to change? And the third question is, how do we influence change? Okay. And we will just take them one by one, step by step. And my expectation is that it will be a very interesting conversation. So I'd like to open it by asking you, what is change? If you feel that you have something that you can say in response to that question, then feel free to put your hand up and let's get started. Yes, Lizzie is going to start us off. Thank you, Lizzie. Just unmute yourself first, please.
There we go. Hi.
Hi.
A break in the rain in Los Angeles, walking my dog. The change to me is the natural flow of life.
So it's all the time. It's just what's happening.
Yes. Yes. The
Yes.
pace of it can be different at different times, but it is the natural way of life that I have spent a lot of my life resisting. But not anymore.
Doesn't work very well, does it, in the long term?
No.
Okay, so
No.
that's interesting. You said the pace of it can change, and I would suggest the intensity of it can also change.
Yes.
We can have experiences of change that are where we talk about change a lot, which seems to be happening everywhere at the moment. And we can have times where we feel relatively stable, but actually, as you say, that flow of life is still happening and things are actually changing all the time. Okay, thanks, Lizzie.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah, sure.
a good start. Let's go to Catherine.
Hello, thank you, Sarah. When I think of change, I really see it as opportunities. I also see it as usually something better comes from it, but maybe while it's happening, we're not exactly sure. But at the end of it, change is all in my life that I've experienced. Something better has always come from it. Maybe I'm learning something more or exposed to something in the world, changing maybe some of my perspectives and opportunities for things that I may have not thought about before. And I believe it's an opportunity to for my own self to really become even more in touch with my soul and my purpose to live here on this planet. Thank you.
So you brought in a context, which is what I would call an evolutionary context, change bringing evolution in a way. If it always produces a positive outcome, it's always evolving. That's interesting. Interesting that you bring it back to the soul, because the soul in a way is the bit most often we think of as being eternal and maybe not changing so much, though it has some very changing experiences, clearly. So I think it'll be interesting to explore that a bit more deeply through the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go to Sharon.
Hi. So from my perspective, our soul cannot not grow. Our soul is always evolving. Our soul is always growing, and change is a part of that process. And we can't control it. And I just did a video for my Sunday talk, and it's called "When Shift Hits the Fan." Which is about change, but too, when things happen so fast, how do we, because we're not prepared, take that deep breath and put ourselves in alignment to make the best of whatever the shift or the change is. So for me, it's the soul is always evolving, and that's what we're here. We're here to be co-creators and to enjoy the experience of living, to grow.
And certainly living on this planet can involve a lot of change, can't it? Well, if you think of from being a baby to being a very old person, that's the perfect example to see how much change has happened. Thank you. Liz.
Hello, everyone. Two things that are coming in right now are that change is about relationship, interrelationship, relationship between things. When things are in relationship, they have to have an impact on each other, and so some change will naturally evolve. And I'm also really feeling that change often has a destructive kind of quality, destructive to what is, disruptive to what is. And I'm just appreciating the variances of destruction, like in the natural world, avalanches and floods and fires and things like that. So I'm appreciating that it is evolution and growing, but it is also often wildly uncomfortable, perhaps, to the one in me who likes solid ground under my feet. And I feel like it asks something of me. It asks for a creative response from me.
It's interesting what you said about the relationship piece, because it seems to me that perhaps one part of this, I'm just exploring out loud really, is that when any things are in relationship with each other, can be human beings in relationship with each other, it can be a human in relationship with life, or we're in relationship with everything really. Every single bit of life, so to speak, has its own pace, and so we're never exactly the same as the other thing that we're relating with. And that probably creates a kind of dynamic that produces change almost by definition, because we're never going to be 100% in sync with each other, where like when two trains are going at the same speed, you can't tell that you're moving. But even if one is still and the other one's moving in the station or something, it feels like you're moving. I don't know if you know what I mean. I always used to notice that in the station. So the relationship produces dynamics, and dynamics are change.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now just of like riding my mountain bike down a trail, and the terrain is coming up to meet me, and it's shifting and changing, and it's changing the acceleration that I'm moving at and the trajectory that I'm on. But I'm also influencing where I'm steering the bike and how I'm steering the bike and braking to control my speed. So I'm feeling the complexity and the dynamism of it.
Well, because there you're in relationship with your bike, you're in relationship with the terrain, other things as well, but those are the two primary ones that you particularly mentioned. And they're both behaving. You're behaving, so to speak, they're behaving, everything's in action.
Yeah, in relationship with gravity, in relationship with space. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And with other objects that might come up, stones. Yeah, interesting. And so change can be like leaves growing on a tree, just growth. And change can be the tree falling down and crashing and destroying everything underneath it. There's a very, very wide range. There's a big variance when we use the word change. I think that's very important to recognize. Thank you, Liz. Let's go to Katie.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Sarah. Thank you for today. So for me, change is, as all the ladies said before, it's something which is part of our life. We change every time we get up in the morning. Sometimes change is so subtle that it doesn't upset the status quo. So I can choose, I can change. Instead of having coffee in the morning, I can have a cup of tea. Nothing happens. The weather changes, so I change what I chose had chosen to wear. But I think for me, change has got a bigger impact and then creates resistance when it is slapped in our face.
Mhm.
When we reach a point where it's either or. You go to the doctor says, hey, you need to change your lifestyle. You have to make different decisions. It changes when the government changes. Somebody else comes in and decides to do his thing. Change could be with the loss of someone. Change could be when the kids go from one school to another or leave the house because they grew up. Change could be changing a car. First days we change a car, we only talk about the old one, how good the old one is. And then after 2 days, who remembers the old one? It's all about the new. So I think it comes down to a mindset, to feeling safe, and trusting that the universe is working in our favor, even if at that moment we say, oh my God, this is drama. And then you look back, you go, oh my God, this was the best thing that could have happened to me. Relatively, we can't talk about everything absolute, because losing a partner is devastating no matter when you look at it. But yeah, change is a massive concept.
It is. I think you're right. It's actually a very big concept, and it's very important.
It's layered, yeah.
Because there's one thing which is that kind of change that happens. Let's say you lose someone or something, which was you might be anticipating it. My sister died when she was about 28, and she was ill for about 15 months before that. So there was a long period, I actually didn't know she was going to die. My parents knew, but thinking back on it, that was one thing where it was kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
But even though it was inevitable, when it actually happens, there's still a massive adjustment. And we all have changes like that where we know that things are going to change. I remember going to boarding school for the first time.
Yep.
You anticipate it for a year or something, but when it happens, you've never experienced it before. So there's that kind of.
Yeah. So sometimes, change is spontaneous. You want to do that. And sometimes change is received, the push is received. So I'm now in a position where my house is on sale. And what do? Shall I wait for somebody to buy it and say you can stay? Or shall I take the initiative 6 months ahead and go, I'm out?
Yeah. Decision. So change brings decisions.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the other kind of change, which you alluded to, and one of the reasons why it's coming up so strongly at the moment, is because we're seeing a lot of change on the world stage very rapidly. And some people are very challenged by that. Some people are very excited by it. Some people are very relieved by it. Some people are very threatened by it. So it's bringing out all responses, I would say.
But this is also part of a moment where there is a massive acceleration. Somebody mentioned acceleration. For me, I mean, I'm very productive and, and I tick my boxes, but I find myself at the end of the day saying, I hadn't had time to do this and this and this, and I didn't stop. So it's like linear time is fast paced. So I said, okay, let's try to control that. But also it's because there's so much anxiety in the world, which has been accumulating since COVID. And the anxiety is not exactly the best friend to embrace change. Because the more anxious we are, the more security we want to have. And we are deep into scarcity, deep into lack. And do you want to hold on what you got because everything else has been taken away from you? It's not a funny moment at the moment, but it will change.
I think what's very interesting here as well is the link between change and time. So I think that may come out a little bit more somewhere along the way in this session, because if you don't have time, you don't have change, clearly. Or in one moment, nothing changes. It changes from moment to moment. So the dynamics of time with change are important for us to look at when change feels very fast, or when life feels like it's going very fast. That has an impact on us, which is different from very slow change, for example. So these are things for us to go more deeply into.
And one more, if you win the lottery, it's a massive change within a fraction of a second. Your life changes completely for the better.
Yep.
You know, more possibilities, more freedom, more opportunities.
Yep.
So.
And ironically, typically 2 years later, people are back where they were when they started, which is really interesting as well in relation to change. I think that's actually a really interesting point there, because very often we're given this opportunity to change, but we try our hardest to stay the same. And so that when we come to how do we respond to change, this is going to be an interesting thing to explore. Thanks, Katie. Let's go to Julie.
Hi. Oh, bless you.
I'm sneezing.
I had a sort of interesting progression of thoughts as you asked the question, and the first thing that came up for me was that change at its core is anything different. It's anything unknown. It's unfamiliar. By definition, it's not the same as the thing you were doing, right? And as I kept thinking about it, I was like, well, that's true. And it's also an opportunity. It's an invitation to you to do something, right? Good, bad, who knows? But typically the universe is putting it there because it is in your favor, even though we can't always see it. But it's more than that, because part of what's happening is that this idea that it's not about ticking all the boxes or doing all the things. It's about really being present and being, right? Not doing. We are human beings, not human doings. And so it's also this invitation to sort of grow with the flow, right? So you're doing something different, you're expanding at the same time, sort of rolling along with what comes that is unknown or different. And it's just, I don't know, it's interesting that I don't think I initially didn't see it as quite so big, and yet so like duh, like it's just what's the next thing
every day. So one thing that's very interesting in there, I think, is that there's a certain level at which change is very much about our perception, from what you said at the beginning, because so we know that things are changing all the time.
Right.
We know that, but our experience is this is not changing. The book on my table is not moving at the moment, although I know that if I looked at it under a microscope, everything's moving in there. But my perception, my experience is that it's not moving. My experience is that you're moving and changing in the background. The aurora in the background is changing all the time. So, and then I know people who tell me, I hear this all the time, my life is stuck. And they tell the same story week after week after week after week. And actually their life's been moving on all that time. And other people live on a kind of roller coaster of change. They love the drama of change. So we tell stories about change, actually, don't we? In fact, our whole life, in a way, is a series of stories of change. Interesting. I never saw it like that before. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, and let's go to Janet.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing this, Sarah. I appreciate it beyond words. So I was thinking when you were talking about that idea of it's perceptual, as we pull into our center, things slow down so incredibly that, like, to your point, that book then ceases to change. But even going one step further into the center, as we approach that, things slow down exponentially. And it seems that now, especially in the US, we're being called to really notice that distinction between what is outside of us, what is inside, what we have control over, what we don't, and how time and our perspective really shifts what is the idea of change. The closer I get to that vast eternal that doesn't change, and I get that my soul is growing and expanding, but I also suspect there's a part of me that is relatively, if I can get in touch with it, is relatively stable amidst the change. And that would be kind of the goal, to find that, because that's very unusual for me. I like being out doing, as Jules just said, you know, that we're beings, not doings, but oh my God, are we beings? I'm more of a doing.
Well, and I think one of the topics that will come out today is actually being without doing leaves you very vulnerable to change.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I asked the question about influencing change. So I actually think that, yes, we are human beings, but we are active. We're in a dynamic
Agency. We have agency.
and
Absolutely.
the more agency we have, the better life we have.
Correct.
When we're powerless, we don't have a good life. When you feel that you have the power to influence change, you feel so engaged. It's so,
and maybe that's the centering, you know, to be able to center, to be able to engage, to be able to have that reciprocity with the world.
Yeah, rather than being pushed around by the world. So
Correct, on the rim. Yep.
Being pushed around by change and experiencing agency and power in the middle of change. But I wanted to pick one thing up that you said, Janet, because I totally get what you're saying about the more you come into your center, the more you experience. So for me, it would be stillness, perhaps, which is a kind of,
yes.
And there's a complete non-changing stillness that sometimes I experience, where change is not, it just has nothing to do with change, has nothing to do.
No, it's correct.
Yeah.
It's a feeling state or an awareness.
And at the same time, my experience is that the more centered I am, the faster I can move.
Yes, in control though, in an agency, in something that allows you to have some sort of sense of presence.
Yes. So in a way,
relationship with what's happening.
Yeah, in a way, it slows you down and speeds you up at the same time, which is
magic.
very interesting, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and I guess that's the pivot point. That's the skill set or whatever I think that is being developed right now, is that ability to be able to pivot, to be able to have the presence of mind and the openness of heart to be in that place, which allows incredible movement, but incredible stillness.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're beginning to touch already into the second topic. So let's move rather gracefully into how can we respond to change. So you're talking here about that, you know, going into your center, and something we talked about yesterday that I feel is very important in this topic as well. Somebody talked about truth, kind of, first of all, connecting with, in this moment where maybe it feels like the world's going crazy around me, or my life is going crazy around me, what is true? And I want to raise this because I find many people, myself included at times, you know, something changes or something happens and our mind creates a drama that is not true. And what's actually happening at the moment is just this and this and this. But, you know, so for example, so-and-so didn't pay me for something. Okay, that's just a fact. I might do something about it, I might not. Or I could freak out and say, oh my God, they didn't pay me. What am I going to do? Da, 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 da. Completely different response to the same thing. But the ability to stand back, at least for a little while, and look at what's true here about this situation. And I see this very much in the news at the moment. You know, people are constantly saying, have you seen this, Sarah? Have you seen what's happening there? Have you seen what he's doing? Which mostly what he's doing. And I'm always looking like, do I even know that what I'm being shown here is true? Like, is he even doing that? Because there's no point having a discussion, for example, about your president, about what he's not even doing. So let's find out what he is actually doing, first of all, if we can, because there's a lot of talk going on at the moment, I think, about things that aren't even happening.
It makes me think so much when you brought that up about the baby, you know, that articulation, that look at life where you observe what's happening and either you laugh in delight or you don't, based on the energetics or the feeling that, you know, there's something to being that naive, open, receptive place where there's something else is called into play other than the ego mind judging, because we can't abide by that.
That's right. And we need sometimes to be able to step out of our comfort zone or our normal territory and say, well, why is this person doing this? If they're doing something that I like a lot, or I don't like a lot, or I have an opinion, but do I understand why they're doing it? And if I understand that, does that make a difference or not? And it might not, but I feel that we're very much called these days. You know, we, after all the fact checking we had, and now we don't have fact checking anymore. We have the community, I can't remember what it's called, that they do on Twitter, but it's kind of more evolved than fact checking. And all these discussions going on, that was the beginning really of an invitation to us, I think, to actually consider what's true. The fact checkers didn't do a good job of that. But that's become much deeper in the last couple of years, I would say. What's actually happening here? What's happening to me? Or what's happening out there? What can I observe or see that somebody else might even agree with me about? We could say, well, we know this. And from there, we get a bit of stability in quite an ordinary way. You know, you can get that in a conversation with somebody without having to do really deep work. Julie, and anyone else who wants to respond to the question, how can we respond to change? And look, in the context of the fact that there is so much change, and we are being called to respond to it, and we can expect the change probably to accelerate more, not decelerate for a while. How can we really respond to this where it's not always in our control? Julie.
So I think what came up to me was a little bit about what you were speaking about before, in that, in that scenario of I did not receive payment, as either simply I did not receive payment. Oh my God, I did not receive, and what am I going to do? This sort of idea of just isness, that things aren't necessarily happening to you, right? And if everything is happening to you, that means it means something about you, and this story creates about all of these things. And if you're able to accept that things simply are, right? It simply is this thing. And so you have agency, you get to choose how you react or how you respond. Are you going to react and flip? Are you going to just observe and note that if it's not happening to you, that it might in fact be happening for you, where it may not happen to you directly, but it's bringing something up that needs to be addressed. It's alerting you that this is bothering you, so maybe it's not about that, it's about something else. It's really, I think, this sort of never-ending choice, where you get to choose your own adventure, and you get to decide how you live your life with that. Because there's a lot of people who are very upset, and there's a lot of people who are very excited, and these extremes. And what if we can just all recognize that everybody gets to have their own experience? And this feels good to me, so I'm going to pursue this in a way that allows me to check if it's true and find out the things I want, or determine how to behave for me, right? Because really, that's all that's in our control.
Yes, but we get feedback from other people. So sometimes we do things like, I've seen situations, and we've all experienced them, where finally, I feel, oh, this is really good for me, but it turns out it's not great for somebody else. And what do I do about that? I might say, well, it's good for me and it's working, and that's your problem. And I think there are times when that is. It could be that I need to say, well, this is great for me, but it's clearly not working for you. And here's a really interesting response point, because what I see many people doing is they say, and I think we're all familiar with this, okay, well, I'll just make it all right for you. That's easy. Or I'm going to start with me. What's difficult is there something that would be really great for both of us?
And I think that's the piece, is that you get to choose whether it's like, because it obviously needs to sit well with you to honor yourself and who you are as a person. And what if there is a way that everybody can actually be honored in this situation, or acknowledged in this situation, and if we approached things with, isn't it interesting, versus
Yeah.
that's wrong, that's right. And like this, like somebody mentioned, like this curiosity. What if I just get to observe? Isn't it interesting that I'm thinking this? Isn't it interesting that, oh, I thought this was good for me, but it's not good for these people.
Yeah.
And
And
oh,
then
that
if we
matters to
go
me.
then if we can go that extra mile and
Right.
say, okay, I'm looking for something that is just as good for me or even better. And this, I think, is very, very important in terms of the way we respond to things. Because that takes, I mean, that's the work of consciousness. That takes a
Right.
decision. That is work. And honestly and truly, I think very often it takes quite a bit of doing, because if there's another person involved, so even if the doing is
Oh,
having
yeah.
a conversation that you don't really want to have, or in business, very often it's like, it's so easy to do the thing that everybody else does, or the thing that everyone thinks you should do, but you know somewhere that it's not right. It takes real courage and action to say, hold on, we need to talk about this again, or we need to look at this decision again, because this
Yeah.
is not right. And everyone thinks it's right, but somehow you know that it's not. So this is where I think responding to change becomes very important.
No, I agree. And I think that that concept of, it's not just acknowledging, right? Objectively, isn't it interesting? This is good for me and it's good for other people. And now what am I going to do about it? What is the piece that I get to do? And it's not that I have to do this burden for everybody, but now that we've identified, or I've acknowledged these things, how do I show up like that? What do I do to share and honor that, not just for other people, for myself as well? Because when I honor myself, I can then ripple effect that out. And it's just, I don't know, like I had the phrase, but like all of those old adages of like, it's you have to like walk the walk. Like, what's the next thing? It's, words are empty without the action to follow it up. And
now
so
we're really talking about change.
yeah,
Now change has happened, change is going on, but we are now deeply engaged in change, because if you start walking the walk as well as talking the talk, you have to change. It's
right.
impossible to stay the same if you want to walk the walk. So that's very interesting, actually, how it comes back to change, but now we're operating at a much deeper level of change. Thanks, Julie. Let's go to Connie.
Hi there. Hi, Sarah.
It's a familiar voice.
I haven't seen you for a while.
I know.
What comes up for me is, what if everything out there is for us? And there's probably about, well, we have 91 participants here. So there's probably 91 different things that are for us.
Mm-hmm.
And the way
This
I'm
moment.
working, and the way I'm working through the challenge of our country right now is that this challenge is a blessing, because it gives me the opportunity to bring back to myself what I need to heal.
Yep. And some of that is exactly the stuff that you may react to.
Yes.
It's out there. So wherever you react, you know that that's about you.
Yeah. And it's been really, I can't tell you. I go back to a lot of things that you've taught, is the alert neutrality. And I get to that place. It's like, I bring it back to me. I feel it. Let's say it's anger. I feel it. And then whatever anger in me dissolves. It's almost instantaneous.
Yeah.
So I feel like everything out there is such a blessing to bring back.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's my doing.
Yes. It's like there's also a kind of a doing of the being there.
Yes. Yes.
It takes a choice. It takes a conscious choice to do that.
Yeah, and I'm finding it's a shorter period of time because first it's, you know, a bunch of curse words coming out and pulling my hair and it's okay, bring us back. But it's a short period of time. But also the important part is I felt it. I
Yep.
didn't stuff it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. And Paula.
Hi.
Hi.
For me, change is more subjective. Like thinking of a spectrum from form to essence, you know, and my vibratory frequency changes on that spectrum. And depending on where I am, I attribute meaning differently.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm more toward form, identifying myself more as, you know, human form, I'm more engaged with assessment and decision making and will and intention and those kind of things. As I move more toward essence, there's much more trust and there's a widening or an expansion of understanding. And I don't feel as frightened and I don't feel like I have to decide what to do. It's more like I'm just moved in some way. I just find myself in, it's almost magical when you look back on it later. You just find yourself in a place and you say the things or you do the things and it's totally effortless and it happened. And then you're back, when you go back to the form awareness, it's like, wow, yeah, that just happened. That's pretty cool. You know?
One of the things that I find very interesting, Paula, is the human capacity to be in touch with more than one of those things at a time. So let's give a simple example, first of all, because this really lies at the heart of all of my work, in fact, is our ability to bring together the intangible, let's say, or the non-material world and the material world. If we go too material, life becomes very heavy. If we go too intangible, it gets kind of so light, you're not grounded. It's very difficult to live as a human being. And to me, what I find is that if we can bring those two together, we actually have the capacity to experience both together, then we have a very full, alive life. So you had a spectrum from form to essence. What I think is really interesting is how do we bring that essence into form, so to speak, so that we can have the benefit of the calmness in the midst of the activity and the change.
You know, I have times where that integration just happens. In fact, yesterday it happened. I'll give just a really quick little example. We had a snowstorm in Minnesota and I was traveling on Interstate 35 and the semi in front of me put on its brakes and there was no way I could stop. Like no way. And I was just in a regular little sedan car. And I felt myself sliding up. I stayed calm. I felt myself sliding up toward the semi, and then this was in the left lane. And so I steered out off the left lane. I kept my right wheels on the shoulder, and my left wheels were in the grass and the snow. And I just kept driving past the semi and a few other cars. And then there was an in way I could get it back in. And I was right in line with traffic again. And I was so calm through all of it. And it was like absolutely no big deal. Like it was smooth.
So I think what's interesting then is how do we do that, for example, when we're doing business, when we're in our life, how do we bring more of that essence so that we don't have such a jarring experience between.
Well, I guess when I think about this, my presence was required. You know, I made an absolute commitment to myself that I was not going to have an accident.
Yep.
And my presence was absolutely required. And something shifted at that point, or a certain point, where I just was in presence. I was just in
That's
presence.
very interesting also in relation to time and change, because that was a very rapid change that you were experiencing there. And a potentially, obviously, life-threatening change. Okay, interesting. Thank you. And Janet.
As luck would have it today, this came in the mail.
Oh, that's the old version. How did you get hold of that?
So I've been listening to you for months, but
Same.
what I was listening to today, which came up, is chapter 5, and as we're talking, it's or 4. You know, just this idea of this trust. Imagine yourself as your life you want to be. It seems to me that chapter is so redolent with these ideas that if we would practice these things, when what Paula just was talking about, we would be in a position where our practice has made these things something that just occurs for us. I'm certainly noticing that as I'm working more and more deeply into this material, that it does center me in a way that allows me these gifts or the miracles, because they're expressions of who I'm being at a very deep level. But that's coming from practice.
So this is really important. And again, a good reason for having this conversation is to remind us to practice.
Yes.
Remind us that if you want to be able to respond to a very challenging situation, it is much easier if you've been practicing responding to change in a healthy way for a long time. And it's one of the reasons why I do the work I do, because we are in a challenging situation as human beings. We have several things knocking on our door where we will need to make really consequential choices. And I say consequential because whichever choice we make, even if we make a choice out of passivity, out of not choosing, will have really massive consequences, not only for you, but for other people. I think that is one of the themes of the level of change that we're experiencing now, is the level of consequentiality. And also potentially, we'll come to this soon, the level of influence that we're able to have. We have never, at least in our written or known history, had the opening up of this deep inner work, which used to be all secret. You know, the access we have now to inner work, to former secret knowledge, is extraordinary.
Also, to have so many women present that are educated, that are at a point in history. Eleanor of Aquitaine, I think, probably sat here at one time, but that was rolled over. But we're here again, and I think it's so important to have these conversations.
Yes. Yes. Okay. And Julie, and please feel free to add your hand to the conversation. You don't need to just sit and watch.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm just going because nobody else is. I wanted to say 2 things, if that's okay. One is just off of what you were both just talking about the practice. When I first started working on things, even just as simple as setting an alarm on my phone to practice deliberate breathing for like 30 seconds, 60 seconds, it felt like such a chore. And it was such like, oh, I have to do this again. And now it's to the point where I'm more regulated and I breathe deeply all the time, but I had to practice. You have, right? When you're learning to do something, it's not practice makes perfect, right? It's practice makes progress, and progress makes permanence. And so you build these habits and routines. Anyway, I just wanted to share that. The thing that I thought about, and maybe you have thoughts, when you talked about like how do we bring this into real life and in business exchanges and in interpersonal exchanges, and what came up for me is like what's so cool about this time and what I hope for the world is that we can all begin to really take a look at what is truly important and what's really important, like not just what we've been told was important. Because if you really want to look at the influence we have on each other, the things that we accept as norm, as quo, is like I don't know what other example we need about how deeply humans can influence other humans.
Yes, yes. And how
In
deeply unacceptable many of the things are that
yes,
we accept without even thinking
yes.
about.
And
Yes.
so what if we're at a point where instead of trying to make the most or get the cheapest, like we want to do the best we can
Yeah.
with the best we have in the best interest of whatever we're doing. And like, wouldn't it be interesting if we all came to the table like that?
It would be a different world. And so we're talking again about consciousness here.
Yeah.
For me, consciousness is the ability to make choices when we're unconscious, like
Yeah.
in hospital. You know, there has to be a form signed because you can't make choices for yourself anymore. You can't make decisions. So consciousness at a very fundamental level is about being able to make choices. Now, you can only make a choice if you have awareness. If you only know one thing, there's no consciousness involved. You just do the one thing. But because you have awareness, you have choices, and then consciousness gets engaged. So consciousness is very different from awareness. And many people confuse them. And when you make a choice, it changes reality. So a choice doesn't change nothing. If you actually choose, you say yes to something, you say no to everything else. The unlimited number of other possibilities are all refused in every single decision that you make. And we make decisions all the time. This is important because this is part of how we respond to change. What are you choosing?
Yeah,
Yes.
and I mean, to use whatever, the matrix, whatever you want to call it, how often have you had an experience where you don't remember driving home? You don't know what just happened in that meeting. You spent a whole day with someone, and right, we're only like actively conscious, what, 3 to 5% of the time they're saying. And there is a difference. Like you can't have, I think, true consciousness without being aware, but you've got to start there and then build. And when you're actually choosing, like you're using full agency and in your own power, deciding something and then standing for it and acting with it is just, I mean, that's how worlds are changed,
That's how worlds
right?
are changed. We're beginning to move into the next topic, but I think this is really important. I would say that the biggest thing that has made me more capable in the last few years is over and over again, when it seemed like I should just do the obvious thing, I gave myself permission to question it. Is this the right thing to do? Does this really meet, what I'm making? Does it really align with the values that I stand for and other people stand for? There are many different ways of asking the question, but that is never the easy thing to do. It is always the
No.
bit that takes more work. It's much, much easier to just do what you've always done or do what everyone else is doing or copy somebody else's formula. It really takes energy to engage. But the beauty of it is if you invest that energy, the return, the energy you get as a result is much greater than what you get when you go on
100%.
business as usual. So this is really, really beautiful stuff that we're talking about here. This is life-changing, world-changing stuff.
Yes.
Connie.
I have found what really works for me is creativity. And I just picked up painting, and it gets me out of my head, and it's like a doorway to consciousness, to my soul, and so many wonderful options and solutions come out of it. It's not by thinking, it's by creating.
Yes. Well, yes. And then, so what happens if we could actually create in during a process of change, not just influence, but create?
Yes,
Then
yes,
we're in a whole different level of territory there.
yes.
Let's go to Janet.
This is making me think of the dynamic, we talk about choice, we talk about change, but when you pull back, what you're saying, creativity, imagination, that gives us that third aspect, otherwise we're stuck in the duality of either or. And I think we are moving into both and. I think our capacity as humans to be able to step back, not to do the conditioned or instinctual response, but to be able to hold that place where we can encompass right, wrong, whatever we're saying, right, wrong, but to be able to encompass the duality with a love, a space around that where we're not required to do either or, where we are open then to our imaginations, which to me, that is the precursor of change. As you're saying, if we insert ourselves into something, we can be agents of change into something by just our being present.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is exciting.
Yep. Yep. And Kate.
Sorry.
Are you there, Kate? You're muted right now from my view. I think there might be a time lag or something going on with you. I'm not sure.
I'm there now.
You're here now, yes.
Okay. You were talking about going on to the third question, how can we influence change? If we make a decision for what it is that we want, we're more in charge of what of how things turn out, because inevitably there are things that do happen that influence our response to it. But if we decide for something, then we're heading more along the path that we're creating. So decision is actually a huge
It's a huge power. It's a huge power, actually, isn't it? The power to make a decision is. So I think this is what Kate's raising here is very interesting, because there are places where we can go, very deep places where life is, life is. And we don't really think about making choices. There are no choices to be made. There are places we can go more in everyday life where we're busy doing things and we're making choices all the time. In my experience, there's another place where these two come together, so to speak, where we are so aligned with life that when we make a choice, genuinely we make a choice. It's like that we are life choosing its experience. And that's really different from either the kind of very self-centered choosing or the no self oneness type of not choosing. And I feel this is very interesting because after many years of observation, I see that if we spend too much time in that kind of very spiritual oneness sort of place, we actually get pushed around by life. And a lot of people end up not living a very good life that way. I've known people who've done it for many years and they've reached some state of emptiness or oneness or whatever, but actually in their 70s or so, it's not working. It really isn't working. And obviously we probably all know people who are very materially focused, or maybe obsessed with making money or something. They don't have any sense of the energy world or the intangible world. And that doesn't, that real power that we're touching into here isn't present there. The power of the material world always feels limited compared to the power of the spirit world. It's hard to find the right word in a way, but it's a very different kind of power that we can have access to deep in the essence of our being. And so asking the question, how do we influence change? We start to look at it in terms of who are we really as human beings? And where do we influence change in a way that produces these outcomes, like at all levels, that are, let's say, life affirming? And what are there are other ways that we influence change at all as well? So I'm going to just start from the assertion that every single second of every moment of our life, we are actually influencing change. Then we might ask ourselves, well, how am I influencing change right now? What kind of influence am I having? That's an interesting, I think, a very, very interesting exploration. Let's go to Julie, and I'd like to see some more hands coming. Okay, yes, Kate.
So to pick up on what you just said, that it's our expectation of the outcome that helps that flow of what happens in the end. It may or may not affect people around us, but when we make a decision for something, it's because it's something that we would love to happen or to have or to create or whatever aspect that we're into. But it does happen, and it feels good because we have that expectation that it can and it will, and there's no pressure, there's no push energy there. It's just doing all the things that help us become who we want to become, or create what we want to create, or do what we want to do, go where we want to. You know, the just living life the way we want it to be can
but actually
be...
we're influencing we're influencing people all the time in that. It's not actually just about us. And
no,
of course life
true.
And we're part of a dynamic life, so life is filled with everybody's wishes. It has to kind of fulfill everybody's wishes together, so it's a very dynamic. We don't so how all of that interacts together, I think, is really interesting. And so I again ask, how do we influence change actually?
And our change influences other people's, which creates change for them. Yeah.
Yes, which creates more change, which creates more change, which creates more change. Okay, and let's see some new hands coming up here as well, please. Not that I don't love the hands that are up, but just to open up the conversation to different perspectives. You can't find your hands. Well, I'll put your hand up for you, Fiona. I'll come to you after Janet. Let's go to Julie, and then Janet, and then Fiona.
Do you want to take Fiona first since she hasn't spoken yet?
Okay, Fiona, you've been given a space here.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Julie. Love your conversation, and thank you to Sarah. This is very inspiring and very necessary, and it's good to be here with everybody. The change, what's changed? Life is change, and I'm just
how do we? Let's go back. How do we influence change?
We influence. Yeah, sorry, that's the question. Now, we influence it through how we ourselves behave, react, view, believe. We are very powerful creators, despite what our education systems might have taught us when we were growing up. And I think that's what Sarah and people, I mean, Sarah's a fantastic educator, as I think we all know. She's really, got the gift of educating us for this new world that we're now creating and co-creating, but we need new kinds of teachers because we have so many kind of false beliefs in not being able to, not been allowed to express ourselves or use our power. So we have a lot of learning to do to really believe that that it's possible to be an influence on change, that we have got a voice, and that we can break out of this kind of victim or good girl or whatever kind of scenario it is we've been packed into. And
because even as that victim or good girl, we're still influencing change all the time. And that's the gritty part of it. Is you can be being that good girl, and you are then complying with all kinds of people you probably shouldn't be complying with because you're just trying to be a good girl. You're doing things that you wouldn't do if you weren't such a good girl. So all of these behaviors are actually influencing change, which is a beautiful invitation to explore this power, this creation power that we're part
Yes.
of. Yeah.
And something interesting that I've just kind of been, I mean, more aware of, I think there's, you know, this whole duality question of good and bad and right and wrong. And that point of power, I think I mentioned before in the chat, is that point in between those, the duality is the point of true power, where you can really influence when you're very neutral and you don't take a side. And but to get to that point is difficult because we're so programmed with the duality settings on everything to be really impartial and not to judge. But what I also understand, just to finish off so I don't take too much time, but is that actually all life will change, that it's not going to be some big split where, oh, the good people kind of go up and the bad people are left behind or something, which I think there's quite a lot of that kind of stuff around, or
anyway. I think there is.
Do you know what I mean? I think it's very inclusive, that life actually is inclusive, and until we embrace the dark side of ourselves, or the lower frequencies ourselves, or however we want to view that we cannot, you know, the change is very inclusive. That's so the good girl, the bad girl part, all will go, all will move forward, all will expand, because that's the nature of the universe, and that's life, and that's change, and we influence it through every second, through our own behavior, our own way of relating.
Yes. I want to come back to this point about duality. One of the things we've been exploring a lot, especially in a course I run called Wellbeing, the Source Code. When I first started teaching it, I was teaching it very much from a kind of duality point. You have well-being, and then you have the experience of not well-being. Or we have love, for example, but you can have the experience of not love. And at a certain point, I realized that actually there's a much better way of approaching this. We're so used to duality now. It's almost like we think that that's how things are arranged. And I've started talking about multivariance. And I started to see that actually, you know, I can talk about, you know, I don't feel well, for example. But actually, it's a variant. It's a part of the well-being experience. It's not actually the opposite of well-being. It's a part of the variance of well-being. And I started to realize that even the darkest parts of life, which feel like, you know, that's evil, that's not love, but actually it sits within the variance of love. And it has changed so much for me, and I think for quite a few other people, to literally break out of this duality thinking altogether, and to recognize that everything in life, if you like, I see love being the fundamental impulse of life, of creation. Everything is actually a variance of love. It can look like and feel like, and we can tell the story, this is not love. But actually, if you look through more truthful eyes, you will always find, thank you for your hearts, Fiona, you will always find that it is a variance of love. It's a variance. Even death is a variance of life. Nothing actually dies when we die. We just have the experience of dying, of not being alive. But actually, everything's alive all the time. Your body, in fact, is really still alive. It's still, you know, parts are still moving. It's giving life to other things now. So yeah, this concept, it's not really a concept, this experience of multivariance is very enriching as a way of evolving beyond, or it includes duality, but duality feels very, very limited by comparison. Let's go to Louise.
Yeah, so I hope that's okay with Julie and Janet. You guys have got some interesting points. I haven't really said anything because I was on the other one last night, which was really great. So I didn't.
It's so different, isn't it, today?
It is very different. Yes, exactly. quite different. Very robust. Yeah. I guess just on the point of influencing and duality and and I'm sorry, I forget who mentioned it, but our own creativity. I think if how we influence change is sometimes what we really love to do. And sometimes that may be difficult for us to do because we've got people to look after, or, you know, family and other things, friends, and even ourselves. So, and money comes into it, which is what you write about. And I know that people, if you ask someone what they love to do from a conversation that is probably a little bit down, the whole conversation changes. Their face lights up, their heart lifts up, and that can influence change in another when they're feeling they can't do too much. But if you just go back to the essence of who the person is, that can influence change for them and other people. I know when someone's asked me that question, I've thought of other people that could help me do something that I love to do, that I can actually move ahead with. So then that makes them, you know, I haven't done that for ages, you know, I really don't think, yes, I know you can. How about we do this together, you know, so it, sort of like a flower.
And what happens if when someone lights up, the universe lights up?
Yeah,
is it possible that that's also what's going on? That's very interesting. Yeah. Let's go to Julie and then Kerry.
This is such a great, I'm so happy I'm here, and I'm so grateful you're doing this. What came up for me before is this idea of radical personal responsibility, right? Like, we get to choose when we are truly in agency and making this decision, right? And that means that we are also willing to take responsibility for the decision that we make and the action that we take, and recognizing that we may have to do something else to then make that right course correct as we learn new things, etc., right? And this idea that you talked about a little bit is everything being this piece of love. Like, if everything that we're doing is coming from a place of, how can I bring more love to this? How can I make this complete? You know, do whatever is needed in this. It's just like, I think at the heart of it is connection, right? Is how do we give what we want to receive? How do we show up in a way? And I think that when we're influencing, it's by example, right? Everything we do is telling choice, the universe, what we want, what we see, what we feel, what we expect. And so where your focus goes, your attention goes, right? That's what you're generating. And so when you are consciously moving through this world in a way that you not only take responsibility for, but walk with pride, and it's just, I believe that changes everything. That absolutely can influence change in what's happening. So
I want to bring in something very gritty here. Not particularly for you, Julie, but I know Kerry, so I know I'm sure Kerry can handle a bit of grit.
I'm open for it.
Well, I'm going to ask all of us actually to look back over the time of COVID and ask yourself, were there times during COVID where you made decisions that you wish you hadn't made? It might be, you got caught in an argument with your family. It might be that you made a decision about your body or about, things we were asked to do or told to do at that time that you wouldn't make now.
Yeah.
And ask yourself, what kind of practice would you need, or would you have needed, to make a different decision under that kind of pressure? Because it's really nice to talk about consciousness when we feel free to make a choice. But what happens when it appears, as it did to many people, that you weren't free to make a choice? At least at the level of laws were being put in place that removed freedoms from you. And for many people, for some people at the time, they knew that. For some people later, they started to figure out, hey, was that really right? You know, what happened there? So everyone will have a different story. And I don't want to say anyone has to have a particular story, but I think it's a particularly challenging example, because I can think back to things which to this day, you know, I question, how would I do it this time, especially in relation to my community? I wanted to create a community where people were safe to come here and talk whatever decisions they were making. And we have a very strong focus on natural health. So that, you know, there were tense conversations at times. But in order to maintain that, there were other decisions I made, which I'm not sure that I would make again this time. So I don't know how I would do it. So this is where you have different values that conflict with each other. And this is where we actually need to get conscious. So I valued community very much there. I value natural health very much. I decided I valued community more, so I didn't talk much about vaccinations and things like that. It was talked about a lot, but I never expressed too much opinion of what I knew, because I had competing values, and I went as far as I could in trying to bring it together. But I have serious questions about what I did, and I think about them still, because I think there will be situations again in the future where we are being pushed or compelled to do things that some of us might not believe in. Maybe all of us wouldn't believe in if we really understood what was happening. I don't know, but I think it's very likely. And so really and truly, this conversation is also about those times. Might not be, you know, big public situation. It could be also in your family. It could be a teenager who's putting intolerable pressure on you, maybe to give you some money that you know that they're going to go and spend on something that you feel is dangerous and unsafe for them. But your love, you know, you're torn, just torn inside yourself. How do we influence change here? This is the really gritty part of this conversation, because if we can do that, then we have, I believe, the power to influence the direction of humanity. We don't have to influence the direction of all of humanity, but to at least allow a section of humanity to go cohesively in a direction that might be different from others. And that seems quite important. So yes, I'm not sorry for bringing a gritty note into it. I'm not at all sorry.
Me neither.
But I do feel that we need to really honestly question ourselves around these kinds of things. The times in our life, that was a particularly public example, but we all do this in our private lives and our business lives. So I'm going to go to Kerry. I'm sure you have something, Julie,
Okay.
maybe come back, but let's go to Kerry.
Let me know.
And see what you have to say. Have I thrown you a curveball, Kerry?
Well, the gritty bit during COVID, you know, I made some major decisions in my life, and it certainly found that I felt at that time I couldn't keep going the way I was going. So it was like, make the decision now or else. It was just that pressure cooker moment. So
it gave you a stimulus for change, an impulse for change.
Yeah. You know, probably everything that was happening at the time, even though here in Australia and where I live, fundamentally, my life didn't really change. But yeah, I suppose it was just the climax of it all. So, you know, facilitated it. So, and a great topic, Sarah. Like, I'm looking at everything that is happening personally with the work that I'm doing with yourself at the moment, that like this morning I woke up and I really did not know where I was. I'm just going through so much change at the moment. And then like, am I really facilitating change? And there'll be, and like I'm on the body corporate where I live. So, you know, some of the people in the body corporate are being, you know, quite pushy. So how do I be?
How do you manage that?
Yep. How do I be true to me, not, you know, react to what they're saying I should or shouldn't have done, and, you know, be very clear that no, under the body corporate rules, this is not allowed, you know, this is out of order. And this is all new for me, you know.
And this is the real challenge of human life, because those people are not doing courses like you are. They're coming from a completely different situation, but we actually need to be able to collaborate with each other, not just with like with each other as a society. So yeah, that's really important, I think. Important experience. So to learn how to influence that, Kerry, it's a wonderful practicing ground. Come and ask in wealth streams. There are things I've seen people do and I've experienced myself, which are quite remarkable in terms of shifting difficult situations with tricky
people. But I'm spotting them now, and I go, oh yes, well, you know, someone else is threatening me about something, and you know, like, it's things that I hadn't been aware of was a common theme in my life. So yes, I am influencing change. Yeah, perfect.
That's brilliant. Okay, great example. Janet.
When you asked that, what can I do to influence change?
Yes.
I think that this is it. This, you know, that's an open question that I don't think we're going to solve tonight.
Yeah.
And I think this is influencing change. To have a group like this where we can express opinions, we can come alive. I think collaboration for me in my own personal life since COVID, the amount of collabs that I'm working with other women, with other people that are, someone else said that before, you know, you get together with someone, you reflect that, and all of a sudden you're living your potential in a way because you're being reflected back. And I think that as much as COVID maybe made us not make decisions, but before that, my God, what did we know? That really tightened up our understanding of, wow, we can play. We can, you know, these things can happen. But I think coming together as women, especially, and not to discount men, but to bring in that nurturing, the wommingness that we have to sustain ourselves when we ask these questions, and not to shut each other down right away because there may be a difference of opinion. I think is the most valuable thing that we have going forward, is to influence change by our collectiveness. We know we do it by just showing up, but what's our reference point so much?
Yes. And just showing up covers a lot. You know, it doesn't tell us very much. It's a nice phrase to use, but actually it doesn't tell us a lot, because, you know, some people are very active in the world. We're doing things all the time, and we're dealing with people and making decisions, and often making wrong decisions and making mistakes. That's real life, you know, whether it's with your kids or whether it's with business or your community or your body corporate. We are actually engaging and doing things, and Kerry doesn't know. She can say, this is the law and it's how it's supposed to be. Is she dealing with it the right way? Could she deal with it differently? Of course she could. And
well, that's
so
the power of the collective, right? To be able to discuss that and have different viewpoints thrown into the mixing pot.
Yeah.
So that we
and the other thing that's coming to me that perhaps is important through discussions like this is that we are then informally but energetically part of a network of communication. And if we are in a crisis situation or a very challenging situation, there is a way. It's like we've already created a forum where we can simply get together. That might be very useful.
Extremely useful.
Thank you, Janet. Paula.
I think in addition to creating a forum, a network is important. When you first asked the question about COVID, I thought about the power of relationships. And in Minnesota several years ago, when we had a referendum about marry who you want to marry, the way the campaign proceeded for that was that people would have home parties. And it wasn't the kind of thing of having a politician come in. There was usually not ever a politician there. But it was neighbors, friends. You invite your friend, you invite your neighbor or the person from across, you know, the town or whatever. And it might be 50 to 100 people at somebody's home with refreshments, and maybe 2 or 3 people tell their stories, you know. And
Right.
so there's maybe a half hour where people are telling their stories, but most of the time is just for socializing. So people are networking just who they are, you know. So, I mean, when you're operating in fear, love is a subversive act, you know, being in a loving relationship is a subversive act. So you create situations where you're building and nurturing loving relationships, and that those people know how to contact each other. And, you know, when there's a desire or a need to bring those energies together, they're ready to go.
Yes, I think a lot about small circles these days, that small circles that interlink with other small circles. It feels, yeah, it's a very interesting kind of model in there. Thank you, Paula. Let's go to Julie, and then I think we're going to be coming to an end. So keep it short, Julie.
Yeah, I was just thinking when you kind of were getting a little gritty, I think for me, I think the biggest thing was this realization of that if I don't make a better choice for myself, no one else will. And really having the courage to sort of be still with yourself and be honest with yourself about who you are and who you want to be and what that means about how you show up in the world. When I think about the things that I might have pushed myself to do or pushed through or acquiesced with or let myself be treated as because it was in service of something, at the same time, I'm not sure if I would be where I am today or have been propelled to who I am growing to be if I had not gotten to this point where I realized it was either me or I was going to die soon. Like it was, you know, so it's just, I think that's.
And of course, when we make mistakes, well, you know, we can regret things and make mistakes, but we learn from that too.
Right.
So that's an important part of our experience. We're not here to be perfect. Okay, Louise, you're going to steal the last word from Julie.
Oh, sorry, Julie.
It's all right. You go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry.
I'm just joking.
All right. Okay, good. I was earlier on going to mention COVID, but I wasn't sure that it was the place. But insofar as change, yes, definitely. It kind of, in my decision making around all of that, it kind of pushed me to an awareness where I'd been in job after job after job, and I haven't really. I'm still not there yet, to be honest, but I haven't really been doing what I really loved. And then I got a, slap on the back of my head, basically. And all that sort of fell apart in the way it did. And I'm still getting, I guess, a grounding in what it is that I would like to create. So I'm getting people and groups of people like yourself and this lovely group and others in my own community where I live. And it's only really just happening recently, where all of that, what we experienced and I experienced in my way, is healing.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so it's all around, say, the change and the influence of the creativity and being with other people of your heart, of your like mind. So
yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to just finish by saying that my experience suggests that as we change, everything changes. That we really are all the same. We all hold access to all the patterns. We're all unique. So somehow this life has this incredible mix of the uniqueness of each of us and our relationships with each other and with other things as well. And at the same time, all being made of the same stuff. And the beauty of that is that I can experience agency or power, as we've been talking about, through consciousness, fundamentally through the power of making choices and decisions. And at some level, I know that just little me, who's really like smaller than an ant, on this planet. I know that it changes everything, and I know that you do, and you do, and you do. And that makes me ask myself a little bit more often, okay, how am I responding to this? Or what people say to me often is like, how do you deal with all the bad news, Sarah? You know, and then I say, well, I'm making new systems. I'm doing my work to make a better system. How successful I'll be, I'll do my best, or maybe I won't do my best. Maybe I'll be lazy sometimes, you know, I'm human, but you know, I'm really put my energy into that because I know somehow that actually just stepping out there and doing something that is right for me, and I'm not suggesting you should do the same, you find what's right for you, that's your consciousness and your choice, but that actually I can see it happening now. It's like the pathways are opening, the new systems are there. It's like the pregnancy is confirmed. I would say it's showing. And yeah, new life is really, you know, it comes out of the old life, but I can say it's happening in a way that 2 years ago I couldn't see it. I could talk about it, I could work on it. So sometimes it feels very gritty, honestly, very gritty, I think, to do things. But the grit is worthwhile. I guess it does make us, I don't know if it makes us more shiny, but it definitely makes us stronger. And there is a power in that. So thank you very much for showing up here today, for all your contributions in the chat, as well as talking, and for your presence. I can feel the presence of people, you know, that you're really engaged in the conversation. You care about what we're talking about. You understand that it matters and that we're doing it together. So I was left after yesterday's with the question of, okay, what do we do next? And something will come along. It feels like, oh, that's the next community conversation. I don't know exactly when it'll be, but it'll probably be it'll certainly be in the next 3 months or so. Because it feels like just a very valuable and cool thing to do. So thank you. And hopefully I'll see you soon. All right. Bye then.